I had been in the field when I received the email from a source at Interpol. The subject line said, "Brace yourself." It had this video attached to it. There's a lot of yelling going on and gunshots. There are men in the water. They're clinging to what looks like wooden wreckage.
And they're pleading for their lives. You see the water all around them jump up as the bullets hit, and then you see them hit, and there's blood in the water, and it's just this red plume.
They're being ticked off mostly with headshots. After what seems like all the men in the water have been killed, a bunch of these deckhands turn the camera on themselves and pose for smiling selfies. Having seen a lot of dark things, this is unusually disturbing. That video began what became a decade-long investigation.
Who did it? Where are they from? Who was killed?
This is the story of a slow-motion slaughter that no one seemed to want to solve. My name is Ian Urbina, and I'm an investigative journalist, and I'm the director of the Outlaw Ocean Project. We focus on stories that occur on the high seas. Usually those stories have to do with environmental, labor, or human rights abuses. The original source who sent me the video was this guy from Interpol. Then I got it separately from a different source, a guy named John Hocevar.
My name is John Hocevar. I'm the Oceans Campaign Director for Greenpeace USA. We know that there's violence happening out in the middle of the ocean. We have talked to a lot of fishermen that have witnessed deaths or murders. People report coworkers being thrown overboard, but to actually have video of this kind of brutality is really unusual. So I wanted to make sure that we made it count. For us, the investigation started with Fiji.
The source explained this footage had been found on a cell phone in Fiji.
Fiji police have asked Interpol to help them unravel the mystery surrounding what appears to be the brutal murder of 4 men at sea.
The Fijian government didn't want anything to do with this.
The answer I got from them was the ship was not Fijian, the shooters were not Fijian, the victims were not Fijian. The sort of bureaucratic coldness conspired to make me hooked.
We had to go back and review parts of this video over and over and over again.
There were multiple vessels on scene when the killing was happening. So there was clearly the main vessel where individuals were firing semi-automatic weapons. But in the background, you see other large steel-hulled longliners, tuna longliners. If you're gonna rob a bank, you're probably not gonna do that with a bunch of strangers. So it was fairly reasonable to assume that the other vessels in this video were probably connected somehow to the shooter vessel. One of them, when you zone in on it, you can actually see its key markings that allowed us to figure out the name of it.
I mean, that was a critical piece to the whole case.
That gave us an inroad to the owner of the sister vessel that was in the background. This was a pretty powerful guy.
Closely connected to the Taiwanese government. On the one hand, we're like, oh wow, this is going to very high levels. And on the other hand, we knew that it was going to be even harder than we thought to get justice done.
Finally, we got the guy on the phone. What he said was that he knew of the incident. The men in the water were allegedly pirates, and this was a case of self-defense.
When we reached out to the fishing industry in Taiwan and the Taiwanese government, right away it started to seem like a cover-up.
They were all spouting this thin line about this was likely a pirate attack. It seemed like we needed to investigate that.
It's coming!
There had been a series of pirate attacks in the region over the years before that.
Somali pirates have been attacking ships in the seas off their coast for years.
We were skeptical right from the beginning that this involved some kind of pirate attack.
The boat in the water that some of these men were clinging to had a pole and a flag still attached. Pirates don't fly flags. There's no reason that they would want to identify their boat. It looked pretty clear that it was a certain type of fishing boat called a dhow.
which is a wooden sailing boat.
The notion that a dhow would attack a tuna longliner also seemed completely implausible. You need a pretty fast boat to be a successful pirate, and very quickly it became clear that this is likely not a pirate attack.
We still had all these unanswered questions. Ian decided that it made sense to publish a story with the information that we did have.
We spent about 6 months working on the investigation, wrote it up, put it on the front page of the New York Times.
Part of the hope was that it would prompt other people to come forward with new information.
After it ran on the front page, a whole bunch of different sources began reaching out with different pieces of the puzzle. And the question was, can we pin down the shooter vessel? We got help, especially from two firms, one called Oceans Beyond Piracy, and the other called Trigmat Tracking.
And they had this really great database of images of fishing boats.
We could meticulously go through all those images and look to see if there are any distinct markings on the ship that you're looking at in the video that match up with the ship that you have in a database. By looking across all these images, we could whittle down thousands of ships to several, and ultimately to one. There was this sort of epiphany moment where we realized we know the ship name, and it's called the Pingxing 101.
Now it started to feel like we were making real progress.
The same ship that seemed to match up in still images had been in another violent incident that was also filmed. It had been yellow carded because of aggressive behavior in illegal fishing. There were a lot of reasons to think this was definitely the vessel. The next priority for me, even though I was officially supposed to have put the story down, was to figure out who was working on that fishing vessel. The best method for doing that is crewless. They're very hard to get. We didn't have any luck with that. The next approach is OSI, open source intelligence. That's basically Facebook. It's a huge sea of content. That got us some potential leads of former deckhands. I was systematically putting in reports on Twitter and Facebook with the hope that I might attract interest from others.
As we got deeper into the investigation, there were people who were actually going to ports and interviewing folks that they thought might have been crew on the vessel.
A private investigator named Karsten von Hoslen actually talked to some of the deckhands and pieced together some of what happened that day.
They were able to find people that said, yes, we were on board and this is what we saw.
The deckhand testimony revealed this was not a piracy attack. This was the work of a notoriously aggressive captain that had a habit of ramming other ships so as to remove them from the fishing area. In this case, the captain had not only ordered the firing, but the captain actually took the gun in his own hands and opened fire himself. The piracy excuse is often a cover for a much deeper and wider source of conflict, which is the oceans are running out of fish.
Overfishing has become more and more severe, and you see more frequent incidences where people feel like they're in competition with each other to catch, the last fish.
We prepared to open fire on you.
How many people were killed that day? When you add them up on camera, you get 4, maybe 5. Those deckhands said, no, there were a lot more guys in the water killed that were off camera. In the end, we don't know still, but it's anywhere from 4 to 15 people were killed that day.
Finally, we saw the Taiwanese government put out an arrest warrant for a Chinese captain who seems to have ordered the deaths of these people floating in the water. It is incredibly complicated to prosecute a crime on a fishing vessel. In this case, we had a Chinese captain on a Taiwanese-owned fishing boat that's supplying tuna to companies all over the world. It's messy. He was arrested and eventually sentenced to 26 years in prison.
That sentence was cut in half to 13 years.
It's incredibly rare that someone is actually charged and found guilty for crimes at sea. At the same time, we know that violence on these fishing vessels is all too common. And so we want to see some systemic change.
I find myself fixated on the still unanswered questions.
We still have questions about the victims of these murders.
The going theory is that these were Pakistani fishermen.
But, their bodies were lost.
Just because we put the captain behind bars, has anyone done anything to make the families of the dead whole?